Good evening. I'd like to welcome everybody to the February 10th, 2022 City of Walnut Creek Planning Commission meeting. Mr. Secretary, will you please call the roll?
Certainly. Commissioner Pickett?
Here.
Commissioner Strongman?
Here.
Commissioner Anderson?
Here.
Chair Kraselic?
Here.
Commissioners Lezak, Ward, and Vice Chair Reiser are absent tonight, but we do have a quorum with 4.
Thank you. The first item on our agenda this evening is the consent calendar, but as we have nothing on the consent calendar, we will move on to the second item, which is public communication. This is the time for anyone who wishes to speak on anything that is not on tonight's agenda. We have nobody here in the audience. Is there anybody online, Mr. Secretary?
No, there is not.
Okay. Then we will move on to the next item, which is public hearings. We have one public hearing this evening. It's the Garden Conditional Use Permit and Minor Use Permit, application number Y21099. And I believe we're going to have a presentation from Jessica.
Thank you. Good evening, Planning Commissioners. My name is Jessica Gonzalez, Associate Planner, and I am the project planner for the Garden Restaurant Conditional Use Permit and Minor Use Permit before you tonight. So getting started with the project location, the project is located at 1719 Bonanza Street. Many know the location as the former Scott's Garden event space. The parcel is outlined on the aerial, and it does have frontages along Bonanza and North California Boulevard. The site is zoned office commercial, and just to provide some context and give a sense of surrounding uses and zones, I did include a portion of the zoning map on the screen. So the blue is office commercial, and directly across the street in red is the majority of the pedestrian retail downtown zoning areas. And so getting into the project, including the 3 applications and entitlement requests before you tonight, there is a conditional use permit request to allow restaurant use. So CUP is required to allow a restaurant on the ground floor of a single-story building in the office commercial zone. And then the second request is for a minor use permit to allow an off-site parking agreement. The proposed use does require 9 parking spaces, and the applicant has proposed to provide those spaces through an off-site agreement, which does require a minor use permit. And then the last application before you is a CUP for alcohol hours after 11 p.m. The applicant is requesting sales and service until 12:45 a.m. and then consumption until 1 a.m. I'll just note that although there are a few applications before you tonight, according to the business plan, the restaurant will more or less operate as Scott's once did. So getting into the new business, the Garden will operate as a full-service restaurant with occasional special events. The proposed business hours are Monday through Sunday from 8 a.m. to 1 a.m., and the space will consist of indoor and outdoor seating, and the business plan notes no changes to the interior or exterior of the building. And so here is the proposed project floor plan, which does show the indoor and outdoor seating. And then the red dots do denote proposed security camera locations. And so moving into security measures, 20 security cameras are proposed at the business. Additionally, the business plan notes that every employee will undergo the responsible beverage service certification by ABC. And then as part of the conditions of approval that were reviewed by the Walnut Creek Police Department is the requirement to have a security guard available on Friday and Saturday nights. This condition, along with the other alcohol-related conditions, should help to mitigate any potential issues related to the extended alcohol hours. So as I mentioned, the project does require 9 parking spaces. Required parking will be met through an off-site parking agreement. The off-site location is the CVS Shopping Center parking lot located at 1123 South California Boulevard. The shopping center is improved with a large striped parking lot with approximately 295 spaces, where the zoning ordinance only requires 170 spaces for the existing uses. As such, there is a surplus, and the lot can provide for the 9 required spaces. So moving into the required MUP findings, the offsite proposal does meet the required parking amount. No parking reductions are requested. Moreover, the surrounding circulation and area should not be impacted, as there are various parking solutions in the vicinity, including a city-owned parking structure, and there's also an adjacent parking structure with available spaces, in addition to metered parking along Bonanza and North California. And lastly, at approximately 800 feet from the new business, the proposed off-site spaces are a reasonable distance from the location. For the required CUP findings, no exceptions are requested, and the project is consistent with the general plan and zoning district. Also, the hours will be complementary to the surrounding uses, including similar businesses in the adjacent pedestrian retail zone. And lastly, the Walnut Creek Police Department has reviewed and has no issues with the extended alcohol hours. So based on the ability to make the required findings, staff does recommend the Planning Commission adopt the proposed resolution, subject to the conditions therein. That does conclude my presentation, but I would just point out that the reviewing police lieutenant is available via Zoom if you have any questions for them, and the applicant is also here as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any questions from staff? Commissioner Anderson?
Hi, thank you. As far as the parking goes, it's not too far from the site, but it's not actually visible from the site either. How are people going to know that that's where you can park for this operation?
Yeah, since it is, it's not right next door, so it's 800 feet. I'm assuming the business owner would more or less have their employees park there, and then, guide patrons there if they were unable to find parking spaces.
Okay. And I know that Scott's itself has an arrangement with Valet Parking to park in the parking structure there. Do you know if the applicant had looked into that, or if that would be a better solution?
For like a valet service?
Right. I mean, like Scott's has that, or at least recently had that, yeah.
I would ask you to ask the applicant, sorry.
Commissioner Strongman?
We'll go back to the parking next to it. Back in the day, when it was Scott's, when you went to an event at the garden, you would pull in and valet, but otherwise, how would you actually access the garden from that parking lot?
You mean the parking structure that's right next door?
That's within the big building, yes.
So there, you can exit the same way where you would drive into, and then there's a stairwell that goes up to the back side. But then you could also just loop around the front towards the white building along Bonanza Street.
Okay. And also on the parking, the CVS parking, according to the our resolution, is that parking is reserved for patrons, which I think it's more appropriate to say that it's more employee parking instead of patrons.
Yeah, I don't think we would normally specify within the off-site parking agreement who could use the parking. I think that would be up to the business owner to kind of dictate whether they're wanting to tell their patrons to go down there or
But
not.
page 4, number 8 is that it's a patron specifies a patron.
mean, in the required findings in the resolution?
Yes. Page
Yeah,
four.
it's the bottom of page 4, and then under finding number 8, it's noted in there that it's describing where the parking is, and it says, from the intersection, the patron would cross the controlled crosswalk, travel a relatively short distance to the restaurant thereafter. And then there's discussion about what a reasonable distance is. I assume it's the word patron there. that
Yeah,
is-
that's, I don't see a patron knowing that driving to the event, the garden. Employee, yes, but not a patron. I wouldn't know to do it. I might go poach parking there at CVS, but I wouldn't necessarily know that it was allowed.
For flexibility purposes, that language could be changed to just read a patron or employee.
That would work for me. No further questions.
Commissioner Pickett?
Yeah, a couple on the, and I don't know which, let's see, on the restaurant resolution, on page 6, paragraph 5, you make reference to a permit issued to the Downtown Business Association, and I'm wondering, why are they involved in this at all?
Which one are we talking about here? Oh, okay. Actually, I can address that. The city works with the I want to call them the Downtown Business Association. Walnut Creek Downtown is their official title. As they're a civic organization, they're allowed to seek permits for special events that individual businesses are not normally allowed to do under our within the right of way under our zoning ordinance. And so this language here is just meant to ensure that that ability still remains something that is done through the downtown, or not the Downtown Business Association, Walnut Creek Downtown.
So that is kind of a supplemental condition or supplement to that condition where but if the Walnut Creek Downtown wants to have a special downtown event, they could have like maybe outdoor music or something associated with that, just a larger event on the scale of the downtown area versus the operator of this restaurant.
Correct, and subject to, of
That's
course,
in
all.
addition to what the.
Yes, it's of course, subject to city approval of necessary permits,
Right.
but it's basically meant not to restrict the ability for Walnut Creek Downtown to
Okay.
have the normal type of events.
So
because it's used
the business has its limitations, but the Walnut Creek Downtown can come in and on a special occasion do something special at that or affiliated with that business.
Correct.
Okay, got that. Then on the, got to get to the other resolution here. The extended hours. Let's see, on page, what page number is this? Page 5, the bottom, 8. You have, there shall be no reduced price alcohol beverage promotions after 8 p.m. I'm wondering, is there some magic about 8 p.m.? Why did you pick 8 p.m. as the time frame? Is that a standard time that we use, or is it like the police department prefers that, or was it arbitrary? Did the applicant request that?
Yeah, we can definitely refer that question to the police department to see if they have any concern with those promotions after 8 p.m. This is a standard condition of approval that is located in our standard conditions for extended alcohol use.
Okay, that's what I was asking. I don't
Yeah.
need to, I'm not suggesting it be
Oh,
any different.
sure.
I'm just wondering why we picked 8.
Yeah.
And-
So that's a standard condition.
And Commissioner Pickett, I have actually have have brought Lieutenant Slater into the Zoom meeting so that he may unmute and perhaps be able to answer that question.
Okay. Is there any, does he want to offer any more insight into that 8 o'clock?
There he comes.
Can you guys hear me okay?
We can hear you but can't see you.
Okay, well, that's the one that matters the most, right? What I would like to just say, if I heard the question right, it was what was the reasoning for the 8 p.m. For drink promotions? Is that correct?
Yes.
My understanding is that is a standard time frame that's used for most businesses.
Okay, so that's been our common practice at Walnut Creek.
Yes, that's my understanding.
Okay, that's fine. I wasn't really worried about it. I was more curious as to why we picked 8 o'clock. Thank you.
Nope.
Let's see, then back to Jessica, on page 7. Paragraph 19, B2, alcohol beverage establishment extends the hour. It's talks about the operator of the restaurant extending the hours of sales of consumption for 30 minutes or more. Why do we allow them to unilaterally extend service for 30 minutes before we worry about it?
Yeah, so for number 19, if you're looking at the extended hours resolution on
Right.
page 17,
Right.
the subheading for that is that the permittee shall notify the planning manager or chief of police if they make any modifications to their business practices, including, extending the hours for consumption, sales, or service for 30 minutes or more. So they'll need to
Okay.
notify us.
So that's giving them the unilateral authority to take our 12:30 and make it 1 o'clock.
That provision actually happens to come right out of the zoning ordinance. 10-2.3.1217 B2. It's actually verbatim from this, where it allows that flexibility for deemed approved status.
So then wouldn't we want to make the time frame a half an hour earlier? So if they extend it, we cut it off when we want to cut it off?
I'm sorry, I said deemed approved. I misused the term. For a change in mode and character of operation, that basically the code does allow a certain level of flexibility. It's not considered a change unless it's 30 minutes or more. However, the Planning Commission does retain, because this is a use permit, the Planning Commission does retain the ability to further restrict that if you so desire.
Okay, well, I prefer to be more definitive, and either we strike that or change it to 30 minutes earlier and let them let it extend it 30 minutes. I mean, to me, it just seems, not sensible to find a time and then say, but that really isn't what we mean. So that's just a comment, not a really big deal to me, but it just doesn't make sense that we're go to the level of defining timeframes and then say that's not really what we mean. So maybe we can talk about that. Okay, so those are my only questions of staff. Thank you.
Commissioner Anderson.
And just to follow up on that, I don't think you want to strike that, since that's actually a restriction, but just take the 30 minutes out would be one option.
Right,
So that you have to notify people if you extend the hours, period.
period, yes.
Another question on the timing of the alcohol. It seems that 11 o'clock is the standard ending point of alcohol sales. But we've had a number of requests to extend them, I think mostly to 1 o'clock. Maybe some have gone beyond that. But, and those have typically been granted. Is there, can you kind of give us an idea of the number of alcohol serving establishments? How many have actually extended hours past 11 o'clock? Or whether just generally, whether it's many of them, a few of them, most of them?
I'm not sure. I would refer to the Planning Commission Secretary, who's a little more experienced.
I apologize. I missed part of that question. Could you repeat that, please?
Yeah, we've handled a few in the last couple of years that I've been here. Requests to extend hours past midnight, past 11 o'clock, and past midnight. And I'm just trying to get a sense, is that typical of a new business or an existing business to do that, or is it just a few of them have done it, or many of them have done it, and most of them have done it?
What's typical for a new business is to start with an 11 o'clock ending time for self-service consumption of alcohol through an administrative use permit. And then in those cases, they'll operate under those provisions usually for a year or so, and then apply for a conditional use permit for later hours if they so desire. And it's not uncommon for that. In this case, while this is a new business, they are essentially taking over. I mean, as Ms. Gonzalez just noted in her presentation, this is effectively a continuation of a previous business. It's somewhat more on a technicality that they need, a use permit, a new use permit.
And my other question is, and I'm not sure if it's for staff or for the police, but the suggestion was that we don't need to have the usual 1 year kind of trial period on this one. I find, our experience has been that when you have that trial period, two things. One is if there are things that need to be corrected, you've got a bit more clout to do that. The second one is that knowing that they're on a 1 year probationary period, as it were, people tend to be a bit, more on top of things during that period. And I'm wondering if there's something special about this. I mean, I know hasn't had any calls in the past, since it is essentially a continuation of the business. On the other hand, they haven't served drinks past 11 before. So I'm wondering, I didn't see a real clear rationale for not having that 1 year period of probation, if you will.
So from my understanding, it's been past practice to recommend that, like Andy mentioned, but it is not a requirement. So someone would be able to come in and propose, midnight or 11:30, and that's what's being proposed tonight. So the extension to 1 a.m.
May I ask one more question?
Yes.
When Scott's was operating the facility, what was their liquor cutoff time?
My understanding was they closed at 11.
Okay.
As far as the records go, though, for that use, we don't have the best records. I think the earliest ones we were able to find was from the 1990s, and at that point they were already in operation. So it's a little unclear, but our understanding is 11 p.m.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you. We will, then we will open the public hearing, and we will let the applicant make any presentation. Go ahead.
Oh, I wasn't sure if we were opening up for anyone to answer any questions from
That's next.
the skybox.
That's next.
Hello, everybody. I was counting when I was sitting there how many times I've been up here, so it's been a lot. But love it, and I keep coming back for it because I love this town and love what all of you and our council and our planning commission and everyone in this building have put together over the years. And I remember being down here, riding my skateboard. Then I got my first ticket down here at 16. And so many years and many businesses. And the reason our family bought this property is because there was a lot of memories for us, a lot of graduation parties, a lot of weddings, a lot of birthday parties at the garden. When it came up for sale, we felt, wow, this is going to turn into another condo project. And so we decided that we thought it'd be a good thing to try to keep the nostalgia, the memories intact. The building next door is all gutted out. There's no more restaurant there. It's going to be retail, a gym. And I have a really good relationship with the building. They've been great to work with. We've been hand in hand coming up with some incredible ideas to just continue, what it once was. Because there is not going to be a restaurant for that building. So we want to make sure that we're available for them to eat and come down and get things. So it all worked out, and Jessica did an amazing job explaining what we're doing. And I've heard some of the comments, and I'm available for anything you may want to ask.
Great, thank you. Any questions? Commissioner Pickett?
Yeah, a couple. I was a little unclear as to what you are planning to be your primary entrance, if it's the one on North California or through the old catering building. Do you have that?
Yeah, for ADA purposes, we have to leave them both open at all times,
Okay.
and they'll both be used. But primary, we think the one with the wooden doors looks the most attractive. We're working on trying to get a valet out there. There's a sea of parking spaces. At this time at night, it's completely empty on that side. So we're gonna, after we get through this process, we'll talk about doing a couple valet and drop-offs right there in that California.
And the plans, at least I didn't see on there, how are you going to control, I mean, you've got with Scott's Gardens, and I know you used to go upstairs and downstairs into it, and the old restaurant you said is being converted into some other use.
Yeah, so there won't be any more of the back downstairs
So is
again.
there going to be a wall built there, or the stairs coming out, or?
The stairs are staying. There's a gate.
Okay,
If you remember, there used to be a gate, but they opened it when there was traffic going in and out. So only thing that we have going in and out right now is homeless. So Trinity 2, I call it.
The only
Every
reason
morning
I
it's a
was
new
there is-
surprise in there.
I guess I was there and they opened the gate for me, I guess. I never had to climb the gate. Okay, and I was really not certain about your operation. You make references to, restaurant service and special events. How do those interplay? I mean, if you have special events, someone says, hey, I want to have a wedding reception here Saturday night, do you just shut down the restaurant? Or
Yes.
are you going to be on an on-call basis? Or how are you going to operate 7 days? I assume you're going to operate 7 days a week?
Yes.
So how do you operate 7 days a week and allow for special events to, again, shut down your restaurant?
Yeah, we're primarily for events, but we thought the activity of people coming through there on regular meals and different things will attract people to want to book events. So just like today at Rooftop, we get calls to buy out the restaurant, and we don't do it often. We just did a few this month so far, but that's very rare because we want people to always come in and have those traffic patterns coming through. At the Garden, since it's been known in history of parties since early 1990s, it's just the phone's already ringing for this. So we're going to plan on opening it all the time, and then we're going to have a calendar online, and so people know where to park also, but also when there's an event. It's really an event destination. There's no traffic over there. When we had McCovey's across the street, we had to flag people down to come in because it's just not really in a walking pedestrian area.
Right.
But we feel that will be a lot of online app-based reservation and letting people notifying it through our social media when the place is being used for a private event.
Okay, so, but basically, you're going to open as a full-service restaurant.
Correct.
Your alcohol permit request was from 8 a.m., so I guess I could get a Bloody Mary or something?
Yeah, well, I know I've been in there for many morning events with the city, actually, and there's different things. I just want to make sure that I cover all my bases. And I've had my 10-year and 20-year graduation reunion there, and we were drinking till 12:30, 1 o'clock. So it's just the restaurant, and I know the police department, us researched what they had on record, but we weren't really watching things back in the early 90s on closing. We were really focused on that at that time. But talking to the management staff that was there, I went to high school at Camp Lindo with one of them. He kind of gave me the whole rundown. He's still locally. And, the restaurant would primarily close at that 11 o'clock time frame. But when there was events, there was weddings, there was birthday parties, the Garden would stay open based on what was needed by the event planner or the party booker.
Okay, so when you first opened, what do you think your hours of the restaurant operation are going to be, and days of the week?
I think we'll open till 10, 11. Like, Rue, you were asking, it was a good question, who has 1 o'clock? Like, Rooftop has a 1 o'clock, but we close at 10 o'clock on Monday, 10:30 on Tuesday, 11 on Wednesday, 11:30. You know, we'll never stay open till 1. This is different because when people are booking an event, that there's a wedding ceremony, they come there, they land there at a certain time for the reception. So it would be different on closing times. But we just don't want people to come to a place that they've come for many years and then say, oh, you have to, stop drinking or Friday and Saturday at 11. And that's why I talked to the chief and Kevin Wilk and Terry Gilmore. And I just kind of said, hey, we're taking a huge investment on the property and to keep what was here to stay. And I just don't want any complications when you're booking events where you have to shut things down at certain times.
So do you plan on being open for breakfast at all?
For ordinary business, there is talks with the building that they're asking us if we would be interested in having coffee and bagels and a place for people from the building to come before. I just learned that Yogurt Park, I walked by it the other day, is now going to be a coffee shop. So I saw the machines and all that, and I've owned coffee shop on Locust before I sold it, and I know coffee pretty well. But I don't want to hurt his business and what his model is, so I don't want to. I'm excited for that to open up finally back up on that corner. So to answer your question, can I see a brunch coming on a Friday and Saturday? Saturday and Sunday. Yeah, I could see that happening. But is it my main focus at this second? Like everything else in these businesses that we're all coming out of COVID right now, it's everything's a changing ball of challenges every day. So my goal is to focus on the PM business, and then once I, get that secured, I'd focus on the AM, which is the lunchtime. If that works, then I'd focus on the lunchtime. I'm hoping, since we've taken possession of it, we've over 75 to 80 events that people have already called to want to book. So I feel that's going to be a really good revenue generator for us. And those times are business lunches, breakfast meetings, and PMs events.
That's helpful, thank you.
Any other questions? Great, I have no questions. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now and you can grab a seat.
Okay.
And we will now open it up to public comments. We have nobody in the audience this evening. Anybody online?
We actually do now have one attendee online. I don't know if they're interested in this item or the next, but I would ask if they do have comments to use the raise hand feature in Zoom. Let us know if they do want to provide comments. And I am not seeing a hand popping up next to their name.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Secretary. We will then go ahead and close the public hearing, and we will bring it back to the commission for any discussions, comments, recommendations. I believe you do need 3 separate motions for this. Is that correct?
I believe there's one resolution that combines the CUP for indoor dining and the off-site parking agreement. So those are in one reso, so that can be a single motion. And then the service hours would be a separate motion, that second resolution.
Thank you. Any discussions, Commissioner Strawman?
I do like this project. I think it's going to be a great asset to the city, and I have no trouble with extending the alcohol hours. Thank you.
Commissioner Pickett?
Yeah, I'm also anxious to see the garden open back up. Thankful that a local person is willing to take that on. I would like to see the one modification to the extension of hours that I mentioned before on the 30 minutes in paragraph 19B2, to be able to just eliminate the reference to the 30-minute flexibility in there. And Commissioner Anderson mentioned the probation period that we've exercised on other applications for extended hours. And I would be open to considering that. I don't think it's necessarily a critical thing for me, but I think maybe it's worth talking about.
Commissioner Pickett, I did want to address that issue. My recollection is we have done that on one or two occasions, and in those instances, they've been businesses that are already operating under a CUP and that have come in and requested an extension. And so that trial period is essentially, we're going to force a public hearing to come back and make sure things are going well after 6 months or after 12 months. This situation's a little different from the standpoint that you're establishing the baseline hours now. There's no existing CUP on site.
Okay, well then the alternative would be to change the baseline hours and include a provision that if the applicant wants to extend it, we'll look at it again in a year. That's, I think, what we've done before.
That's correct.
So, I would just, if anyone else has to weigh in that, I don't think it's critical for me, but it's an approach that has been commonly exercised by this planning commission in looking at late night hours. And all this goes back a long time now, but we had a time when our downtown became very unruly because of late night alcohol service. And we shut down some businesses. Our police force efforts decreased significantly when we did that. And I guess I'm remembering those old days, and I'm not saying Mr. Dudum has had anything to do with that, but I do think we need to continue to be diligent about our alcohol beverage service hours in downtown Walnut Creek. We've maintained it since we got it under control, and I don't know how many years ago that was, but quite a while. But it was really unruly down here. It was pretty bad, and we had used a lot of police resources to bring that under control, and a heavy hammer from the Planning Commission, and I still think we should be thoughtful about that. Again, I'm not saying it's mandatory for me to feel necessary to approve this project, but I think it's just worthy of other commissioners weighing in if they have strong feelings either way.
Commissioner Pickett, I would say that if this was a regular type restaurant activity, I'd probably feel the same way, that we should start at 11 and see what happens. But, and maybe Mr. Dudum can come back up, but it sounds like to me that the business plan, a big part of the focus is more events, which could start at 6 in the evening and go to 1 o'clock. So it would be a group of people who rents out the whole building as opposed to a 7-day-a-week restaurant.
Correct.
So can you explain what you think is gonna happen as far as how many evenings are you gonna have events versus how many evenings might it be operating as a restaurant during the week?
Well, I could tell you for sure with the 2 years of shutdown of events, we oversee, I run Cooperage and Lafayette, and we're getting calls every day. We're even, that's why Rooftop closed down a couple times for events. So I believe that once we announce it, start booking, have someone in there taking events, it's going to be a lot of events, especially because there's been a pileup of things that have been stopped. So my best guess for you is that we'll be doing a lot of events. When we don't have an event, I cannot see, like Rooftop doesn't stay up until 1 o'clock on Friday and Saturday, even though we have the license to do that. We're in and out of there by midnight. But there are times when people book an event that we have stayed open later. So that gives us that flexibility. And getting to spend some time with Chief Knox and talking with him, I'm very happy he's in the position he is. And as he wrote in his email, he feels that the police department is going to be able to let us as operators run our businesses, and if we don't, then he will step in. And I feel he really means that, which I think has been good. I'm for especially people who've never come into this town, to have a little bit more of a watch on them to make sure they don't build something and change it and modify it and then things go completely different. But I think my track record has held the level of detail. When there is a problem, I address it. I'm very hands-on with Officer Slater on the whole downtown meetings and events, and I'm very active in it because I believe that we have to protect our community. So my goal is to be able to have events that can go into the 12:15, 12:30 timeframe.
Okay, so
Do you have a rough guess on the percentages of Friday and Saturday that you would have events? Do you think it would be 50% of the time, 40% of the time?
I think probably coming out of the gate with my best guess of the activities I'm getting on phone calls from other establishments I have in town, I think it's probably going to be 75%.
Thank you. Commissioner
But
Pickett?
especially for the duration of till we get caught up.
okay, so let me just, it sounds to me like the hours of alcohol service that you're requesting is focusing on your opportunities to host events.
Correct.
And not necessarily on the restaurant operation. So if you have restaurant operations X days a week, obviously, if you don't have a bunch of patrons in there, you're not gonna stay open and serve drinks to one guy or
Exactly.
group of people.
We need to watch our labor.
Okay,
If there's
so-
no
so
sales,
the-
we
the
close.
hour- your goal in requesting the later hours for beverages would mainly be for the event, a more controlled environment
Correct.
type of deal.
And according to the guidelines, when I do have events, I'm going to be working with Lieutenant Slater, and I'm going to be working with the police department when we do have certain events, and working hand in hand with them. So
Great. Very helpful, thank you.
Commissioner Anderson?
Yeah, I don't know that we need to start off with, 11 o'clock and move up after a year. But I think that, actually, I think, that the fact that it's a new operation, even if it's similar to the previous one, we don't have a lot of data. And it may well be, and I fully expect at this point that, a year from now, if we had what do they call it, a non-incidental operation, police would come in and say it's working fine, everybody says, terrific, and keep it up. On the other hand, if, the Hatfield-McCoy wedding turns out to be, into a brawl and, we have some unexpected situations, it'd be good to know that and to be able to take that into consideration when we, after that first year. So I think I hope it's not a major position. It gives us another chance to review once we have, some data, since we have none now.
Mr. Chair, if I may, I'd like to add a little bit of some information if I could.
Certainly.
One thing that Commissioner Pickett actually brought up had to do with there was two bars, well, technically restaurants that shall remain nameless that were shut down by the city a number of years ago. And I was actually quite heavily involved in that because at the time I was the supervisor of code enforcement, and those were just to reference that particular issue, or those two issues, I should say. They were both deemed approved businesses that they basically they're grandfathered in, and so they were open till 2 a.m. They didn't have a use permit, and so the only way we were able to go about shutting them down essentially was as a public nuisance and police issues. Whereas in this case, if the commission were to consider approving the extended hours, there's a conditional use permit, of course, that they would be operating under, and the commission, of course, has the ability to set specific operating parameters and conditions. Staff has, of course, recommended a number of them was pertaining to security, for example. But importantly, if things become a problem and the business is essentially not operating as per approved under the use permit, the Planning Commission has the ability to revoke the use permit. And it's essentially a lower bar than no pun intended there, but a lower bar than in the case of an existing deemed approved, where the only way we can go after it is as a public nuisance. So I just wanted to put that out there and also note that, again, there is nothing actually in the code that requires that, the 1-year trial period, if you will. That's something that's been kind of done on a case-by-case basis, I think largely as a result of just conversations between the business owner and the police department. And in this case, the police department is comfortable with recommending approval.
Service ratio standard in here, and I think the reporting is quarterly. Is that automatically submitted to the city, or does the city have to request it? And who does that?
So, first, I actually want to confirm that that is in the resolutions. I know that the California Department of Alcoholic Beverages Controls has generally moved away from that level.
It's in the extended hours, page 6.
Typically, it would be, the information would be submitted to the city upon request, unless, let me pull up that exact condition here to see if it says otherwise. I don't think, it's not normally something that's like automatic, that is,
Paragraph 9.
what pages were we on, Brian?
Number 9. I think traditionally the city has enforced that through an audit practice, meaning it's not something that's automatically submitted, but if the city wants to see that information, it can request it.
So sequentially, and I think there was actually 3 bars we shut down over the years. And again, I can remember the names of 2 of them, but
There was 2 that were on a Locust at a certain cross street, and
two at
there was
Locust,
another one out on
one
Arroyo.
Main Street.
Oh, then there was that one, so 4, actually. I was involved in 3 of them, on
Oh,
the
then
city's
yeah, there
behalf,
was the
not
other
on
one over
the.
there, yes, 4. So I went through all those. Anyhow, yeah, so I would suspect that if there were some complaints or concerns about this operation, one of the first things you could do is you would check, say, hey, this is looking like it's not working. Show us your food to alcohol service ratio data. Because if it turns into just a bar, which it can, if with extended hours, it could be just a bar, then they wouldn't have the required 50% ratio, and that would be a condition, a violation of the conditions, correct?
Yes, and that is information that we could request, if this use permit were to be approved.
Okay, and it is some of the enforcement available to us? We can obviously revoke the use permit, but can it be modified? In other words, can you go and say, hey, everything is good up until the late night hours. We'll let you keep operating, but we're just going to cut it back. We could do that too as an enforcement?
You can.
Okay. All right. Okay. Well, I'm kind of on the fence on that one. I don't want to be overly burdensome, but I've got bad memories. Don't want to go through it again.
Any other comments or motions to be made?
Is it possible that if there are problems, that the police department would notify us through our secretary to automatically consider revoking this or modifying this?
Yes, and that's typically what happens if there are issues. There's a conversation between planning staff and the police department, and if those issues rise to a certain level, then a public hearing would be scheduled with the planning commission to consider modifications to the use permit.
Yeah, in my recollections, there was a lengthy effort between the police department, code enforcement, and operators to bring it under control, and a lot of promises made and a lot of promises failed. But ultimately, after an effort by city staff and the police department, it did fall in the laps of the planning commission. So there was a responsible effort between staff, police, and the operators of those other facilities, trying to get them to bring it into control. So that's just some history on that. That's not really relevant to Mr. Dudum right now. Wasn't one of his places that got shut down. But I mean, I suppose a solution would be to just curtail the hours modestly from what's requested and let them ask for something later, or just leave it like it is. So I don't know if anybody wants to weigh in more on that. I don't have a suggestion for an hour limitation on it. Page 5 of that resolution says 12:45 a.m. Yeah, cease at 12:45 a.m. 7 days a week. Consumption ceasing at 1 a.m. Thank you. Okay. I was referring to planning condition 3 on the extended hours resolution.
Any commissioners wish to make a motion?
Do they have to be two separate motions still?
Yes.
Okay, I'll make the first motion to approve the conditional use permit and minor use permit applications Y21099, the Gardens Restaurant use at 1719 Bonanza Street.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Mr. Secretary, can you call the roll, please?
I just want to make sure that our assistant city, that we're clear on which resolution we're looking.
Yeah, and I just want to clarify, that's with the amendment adding patron or employee with respect to the off-site parking that was discussed
Correct.
earlier.
Correct.
And I had mentioned changing there, deleting the 30-minute
And the other one.
provision of, I think it's on the same resolution.
That's in the next resolution.
Well, that's the next resolution, I'm sorry.
So this is the one for the having a restaurant and for the off-site parking.
Correct.
Okay, so as a motion by Commissioner Strongman and a second by Commissioner Anderson, roll call, let's see, Commissioner Pickett,
Aye.
Commissioner Strongman,
Aye.
Commissioner Anderson,
Aye.
Chair Krasalik,
Yes.
and the motion passes 4-0.
And would any commissioner like to tackle the next item?
Commissioner Pickett, or I guess commissioners in general, before we do that, I do have some suggested language that, with respect to the issue that was raised by Commissioner Pickett.
Okay.
And that's on page 7, number 19, B2. And I would recommend that just be changed to say the alcoholic beverage establishment extends the hours of sales, service, or consumption beyond those set forth in planning condition number 3. That ties back to the specific hours earlier in the resolution.
That responds to my issue, thank you.
Okay, I'll make a motion, if I may, Mr. Chair. The resolution, which is XXX on my document, conditional use permit application Y21099, the Garden Restaurants alcohol extension of hours of operations for alcohol sales, service, and consumption at 1719 Bonanza Street with the additions or corrections from our attorney.
I'll second.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. Mr. Secretary, can you call the roll, please?
Certainly, Commissioner Pickett,
Aye.
Commissioner Strongman,
Aye.
Commissioner Anderson,
Aye.
and Chair Krasalik.
Yes,
Motion carries 4-0.
thank you. Congratulations.
I appreciate it.
We don't want to see you back on this issue.
No, you won't.
Good luck.
I promise you.
Thank you.
I thank you guys. I know I'm listening to what you were saying, and I have all those vivid memories of being part of task force trying to help fix a lot of those places. And I understand that those are vivid memories for a lot of us because we don't want to go back there. But I honestly feel that with the police department for the last chief and this chief, I don't think you're going to get back there. It's a different mentality, and I believe that a lot of people coming in it was the wild, wild west then. People owned leases that were very, very pennies on the dollar compared to what they are paying today. So people really didn't have the vested personal guarantees and the big loans and the high rents for people to let things go haywire and and lose all that. So I think that's, our downtown's definitely coming in a different direction where people are more responsible. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, that takes us through our public hearings for this evening. The next item is commission considerations, and I believe we have one from our esteemed secretary.
Or at least from your secretary. I don't know if I'm so esteemed. Thank you, though. And I'm going to give a moment here for Matt to allow Mrs. Mosesman to be able to share her screen. We will get there in a second. Zoom technology. Here we go. Okay. So I'll go ahead and kick this off, and then I'll be turning it over. So we are here tonight for the first time, I believe, with the commission to discuss our update to the housing element of the Walnut Creek General Plan, as well as the safety element of the general plan. If we could go to the next slide. There we go. And so we have a team. In case you forgot what I look like without a mask, there I am. Although I think I have a little less hair and a little more weight now than that picture was taken, and more gray, definitely. Anyway, I'm the project manager on this one. However, as you are all aware, we are going through some staffing transitions. And so we have brought in Nancy Borgato from Borgato Planning. She actually worked for many decades in the public sector as a planner and up into management, and she's taken on a lot of the most of the day-to-day roles of managing this effort for me because I have some limits on my time. And then we've hired Harrison Associates, with that being headed up by Hida Mosesman, who will actually be giving the presentation tonight. And so I just wanted to introduce them all. And Hida will be making the presentation. Both I and Nancy are here also to be able to assist in answering any questions. So with that, I'll turn it over to Hida.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Andy. Good evening, Chair and members of the Planning Commission. My name is Hita Mosesman. I'm Vice President of Community Development and Housing with Harrison Associates, your consultant on the housing and safety element updates. I wanted to start tonight's presentation by talking about what a housing element actually is. The housing element is part of the city's general plan. I like to say a general plan is like a book, and the elements are the chapters in the book. And this particular element is the primary planning document in the general plan to address the city's housing needs. State law does require the housing element to be part of the general plan, and it does require it to be updated every 8 years. Every city and county in the state of California must have an updated housing element every 8 years and have it as part of their general plan. The housing element really focuses on the housing needs of all residents in the community at all income levels and economic segments. And it really is a great opportunity for the community to come together, provide input, and for the city to implement its vision for the community and to put forth a concrete plan in how to meet local housing needs. The State Department of Housing and Community Development, and as I'll refer to them in the presentation as HCD, reviews and certifies the document. The housing element has many components, and the primary components are presented on this slide. It starts with the community profile, which really is the foundation that describes the community's characteristics, demographic information, like population, income, and employment, and it addresses special needs populations as defined in California law. And this would be groups like seniors, persons with disabilities, large families, and unhoused individuals and families. As I mentioned in the previous slide, the housing element really does focus on the housing needs of the community. So there's a deep dive into that, a lot of data and analysis on what exists in the community in terms of existing housing stock and what the future needs are for the next 8 years, and identifies challenges and opportunities. The law does require that the housing element contain a very specific list of sites or properties where housing units will be developed, and it requires that the income levels for those units also be identified as part of this listing. Housing constraints is an important component of the housing element as well. And those are basically barriers to the development of housing or local codes or regulations that would delay the development of housing. These types of constraints can be governmental in nature, for example, the city's zoning code or development standards, or they can be market factors like the high cost of land, construction, and shortage of labor and materials. The housing element also contains a review of the previous 8 years or the last housing element and looks at the number of units that were developed at all income levels and assesses the effectiveness of the programs that were proposed as part of the last housing element. New to the housing element this cycle is something called a fair housing analysis that I will get into on the next slide, but basically looks at fair housing issues in the community. And all of these sections come together in a culmination where goals, objectives, programs, and policies are developed to alleviate or mitigate housing constraints, and a plan to implement or facilitate the development of housing on the sites identified. As I mentioned previously, there is a fair housing section that is required for the first time. And technically it's called the Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing section. And it looks at issues of planning patterns, historical planning patterns in the city that may have led to any social equity issues or environmental justice issues. So it looks at things like fair housing complaints and enforcement. Outreach is required, a specific outreach for fair housing as part of the community outreach process in the housing element. It looks at things like segregation and integration, a lack of access to opportunities, housing displacement risks, and racially concentrated areas of not only poverty, but of affluence as well, and environmental hazards that might exist near housing units. So why is this housing element being updated at this time? And the short answer is because it's required by state law, and this is the schedule for the region that Walnut Creek is in. So every 8 years it must be updated, and really that's because state laws change. There have been a number of housing laws that have changed in the last 8 years. So the housing element needs to be updated to reflect that and be in compliance with state law. Also, housing evolves in communities. And so the housing element needs to be updated to show how in today's world, the city will facilitate housing development to keep up with the growth that is occurring. A compliant housing element allows a community to continue to be eligible for state funding for housing, particularly affordable housing. And it provides a really great opportunity for the community to provide input into shaping the housing in their community. There is a process that's dictated again by state law and as general milestones that are presented on this slide. Generally, first is the community outreach, where the public, citizenry, stakeholders are engaged and surveyed to determine what housing needs are and the best ways to meet those housing needs. A lot of data is collected and analyzed, census data and housing conditions data, and a draft of the housing element is prepared. It is sent to Planning Commission and City Council for their acceptance and transmitted to HCD for their review. It is available to the public prior to this review, and HCD has 90 days to review it. Then HCD provides comments, or what they call findings, in the form of a letter, and edits, basically suggested edits to make it compliant with state law on some nuanced information. What we're seeing right now is that generally HCD, this back and forth with comment periods, is 2 to 3 rounds of comments. That's what we've seen in the Southern California region that came before Northern California to some extent. At that point, when those findings are addressed, the state certifies the housing element, finding it in legal compliance, and then the city is eligible or continues to be eligible for state funding. So as a preview, for the information that we're currently analyzing, we're really looking at the community profile and the housing needs right now, as well as the site inventory and the fair housing information, but wanted to provide sort of an overview of some of the demographic information that we've gleaned to date. So the city is a population of about 71,000 people. That population has grown about 10% in the last 20 years, which is about a lower growth rate than has been experienced by Contra Costa County as a whole and as the Bay Area as a whole. And you'll notice that the chart or the line graph on this slide, Walnut Creek is the dark blue line at the bottom. The middle line that's sort of a teal green is the Bay Area as a whole, and Contra Costa County is the green line that you see there. In terms of the housing stock in the city, there are 34,000 units. About close to 40% are single family, with the remaining 60 being multifamily. Looking at 2010 data on your housing stock versus 2020, it looks like the most significant growth has been multifamily projects of 5 units or more. Looking at housing tenure, which is really a way of saying renters versus owners in the community, 65% of residents own their home, as opposed to 35% that rent. And this generally tracks with Contra Costa County, but there's significantly higher rate of ownership in Walnut Creek than there is in the Bay Area as a whole. Looking at housing costs, we first looked at rents. And in Walnut Creek, rents have grown about 58% over the last 10 years. This is higher rent growth than Contra Costa County as a whole experienced, which was about 45%. And what we found is really Walnut Creek rents did grow faster and higher than both Contra Costa County and the Bay Area as a whole. In terms of home value versus rent, or home prices, according to Zillow, home value doubled in the last 10 years. This is generally consistent, but slightly higher growth in Contra Costa County and the Bay Area as a whole. So one important component of the housing element is to look at cost burden households. And what that means is households who spend more than 30% of their gross income on housing costs, whether they be owners or renters. So what we're seeing is that a higher percentage of renter households are cost burden as compared to owner households. And I wanted to note that severely cost burden is defined as a household that spends over 50% of their gross income on housing costs. So on the ownership side, we found that about 31% of owners are cost burden, meaning they spend more than 30% of their income on housing. Of that amount, 14% spend over 50% of their income on housing, as opposed to renters, where these percentages were higher. 43% of renters are cost burden, and 24% of those are what's considered severely cost burden, meaning they spend more than 50% of their income on rent. So we're talking a lot about housing costs and rents and prices, but examining median household income, which is what the cost burden takes into account. In 2010, the median income in Walnut Creek, according to the census, was about $81,000. In 2019, it's $120,000, representing almost a 50% increase in 10 years. However, as we saw in the last few slides, the increase in wages was really lagged behind increases in rents at 58% and increases in home value of over 100% during that same time period. So part of the housing element is, as I've alluded to earlier, is there are a number of units that are that need to be planned for in the community. It's not the city that determines that number of units. It actually derives indirectly from the state of California. The Department of Housing and Community Development, or HCD, determines on a regional basis how many housing units are needed by region. And then they allocate those to councils of governments or association of governments. In your case, ABAG, or the Association of Bay Area Governments, received an allocation of 441,176 units. ABAG then developed a methodology based on data points on how to allocate that and parcel those units out to each individual county and city in the ABAG region. And Walnut Creek's allocation was 5,805 units. So this is referred to as the RHNA, or the Regional Housing Needs Assessment. And that's really what the housing element is based on. That's what we're planning for in the next 8 years. So I won't go into too much detail on this table, but the main point here is the 5,805 units are not just housing units in general. The state does require that they be that be broken up into different income levels for different households. So anywhere from very low income, extremely low income, to above market, a moderate income, which is what most people would refer to as market rate. So it's not just 5,800 units in general. It has to be in certain numbers based on income categories according to the state of California and ABAG. And an easy visual way to look at this is in this chart here. So about 40% of the units that you've been allocated from ABAG are what you call market rate units. They're not income restricted in any way. And the remaining 60% need to be planned to be available to anywhere from very low income to moderate income households. So at this point, I know I just provided a lot of data and information. I wanted to pause to see if any commissioners had questions on the presentation so far.
Thank you. Any questions at this point? Commissioner Strongman.
One quick question. Is the ADUs counted as units?
You can count ADUs as units. That would be in the housing element analysis that would be done. What the rule is, according to HTD guidance, is that it can be based on basically the last 2 to 3 years of the average number of ADUs that get approved in the city. So if the average number of ADUs approved in the last 2 years, let's just say, is 25, HCD will allow you to count and credit towards your RENA 25 ADUs per year, because that's your track record.
Thank you.
Commissioner Pickett?
Yeah, I think the most recent thing is SB 9. Is that the one that lets people do lot splits? Is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
Okay, so how does that play into your counting your inventory? Is that a big percentage? You gave us some percentages on single-family homes in the community, and I guess SB 9 pretty much deals with single-family neighborhoods. So you double the holding capacity or building capacity of the city because of SB 9, or how's that going to interplay with this?
That's a very good question, and a lot of communities have that same question. The guidance that we've gotten from HCD is that you can't assume that units will be built purely because SB 9 exists. The way that they're handling that is that basically the zoning and the density on currently at the time that you submit your housing element or you want it to be certified is what HCD will count in terms of your site inventory. So if for example, we have a site and it's, we're trying to say that this single family lot is going to change into 4 units. Let's just say it's going to be subdivided into 4 lots, and each lot will have 2 units on it or 1 unit on it. We would have to provide substantial evidence this is my opinion after my dealings with HCD, in the form of some type of property owner letter or some type of property owner interest that would indicate the desire to do that if we wanted to count it towards lower income units, meaning very low and low. In terms of your market rate units, we can count it that way too, but that's typically not a challenge. But where you do get credit for that is when, let's just say you didn't account for any specific sites for SB 9 in your housing element. There's something called an annual progress report on your housing element that's due every year, where you report how many building permits were pulled in the community at different income levels. So you would get credit towards your RENA or that allocation that way, even if we can't count it on the front end in the housing element as a credit.
Okay, that's not really that clear, but I guess we're in new territory here. I mean, it seemed to me that, and I'm not an expert on SB 9, but it's basically opened the door for any of that activity to occur. Therefore, it's open and free and it's on the table to anybody who wants to implement it. In essence, it's changing our zoning ordinances, and that is going to preempt any of our zoning ordinances. So it seems to me you can count that stuff, but we'll let lawyers figure that out. Thank you.
And that's something that we can talk to HCD about. SB 9 was it's fairly new law. And I think as housing elements are being submitted to HCD, they might provide some additional guidance. But there is a way to count it ultimately at some point. It's just counting it on the front end is something that I haven't seen many communities be successful doing.
Okay, we'll keep an open mind on that one then. Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, seeing none, we can continue.
Okay, thank you. Next, I wanted to cover the safety element update, which is part of the process that we're undertaking with the housing element update. The safety element, again, is like a chapter in the general plan book. It's one of the elements that's required by state law. And its general purpose is to identify and have a plan for reducing risks and impacts from disasters, either man-made or natural. And these include things like fire, flood, earthquakes, and climate change as well. The safety element includes goals and policies for ways to reduce risk, to prevent disasters, and to increase preparedness in the community, with the main goal which is to reduce injury and any loss of life and property damage in the community. It includes things like emergency care and response. It addresses hazardous materials planning, and if applicable and appropriate, crime reduction activities. Environmental justice issues, because this does deal with safety and hazardous materials, are also covered in the safety element as well. In the safety element, there are maps also of seismic and geological hazards, as well as evacuation routes, water supply requirements, minimum road widths, and minimum clearance around structures for safety. The reason for the update, as I alluded to, state law. There was actually a Senate bill that was passed recently that requires the safety element to be reviewed and amended to incorporate information on flood, fire hazard, and climate hazards when you update your housing element. And here, again, I wanted to pause to see if there were any questions on the safety element from the commission.
Any commissioner questions? Commissioner Pickett?
Yeah, obviously, one of the things that has cropped up in recent months, year maybe, is the mob mentality, the smash and grabs, the invasion robberies, whatever you want to call those things. And, you know, although it's not prolific, it's obviously increased. Have you seen anybody or any communities address that specific issue in their safety elements?
I have not. What I've seen are areas that have a generally higher crime rate. And then there are crime reduction sort of policies implemented to help reduce that. I think that the what you're referring to, the phenomenon you're referring to, is relatively new. And I don't think that it's in any way you're prohibited from including that as part of your safety element analysis.
Okay.
I would also add that the safety element would generally, at least with regard to crime, would generally focus more on things of things that would actually have impact on people's health and safety versus just property crimes.
I don't know. I think what happened affected a lot of people's health and safety. And so I think it's something that we need to keep in mind when we do our details on the safety element. I'm not really too favorable of large mobs coming in and invading our city, so we'll talk about that when we get into details. Thank you.
Any other questions? Seeing none?
Okay, next I'd like to talk a little bit about community engagement. It is required for both the housing and safety element updates. Again, I won't bore you with the legalese of this, but California law does require that a diligent effort to achieve public participation in all economic segments of the community be conducted as part of the housing element update to provide input to be able to assess housing needs and solutions. And HCD has put forth guidance that clarifies that the housing element should describe how all economic segments of the community were engaged, how the community engagement was implemented to identify the groups that were engaged in the input received, and then the ongoing effort to engage the public and stakeholders even after the draft has been submitted for public review. And again, the legal requirements do dictate that we will be doing some outreach specific to fair housing, which will also cover environmental justice issues, lack of opportunity, hazardous materials, and the like. With regard to the safety element, the primary public engagement tool historically has been a safety committee, and that is an appointed group of professionals in the safety field like police, fire, water, sewer, storm drain, parks and recreation, who meet and assess safety risks and identify solutions. As part of the process that's being undertaken here in Walnut Creek, there's going to be expanded community outreach with regard to the safety element in the form of workshops and surveys as well. And safety elements, again, do touch on environmental justice issues and identify where those might exist. To that end, a community engagement plan has been prepared, and it outlines a very comprehensive process to engage, again, all segments of the community pursuant to state law. The outreach methods are identified in detail, and that generally consists of specific web pages for each element update, the city's use of e-blasts for their different interest lists, social media posts, announcements at Planning Commission and council meetings, and then regional resources to support local engagement, community groups, and local stakeholders. The engagement leaders of this effort will be city staff, your consultants, including Harrison Associates, the safety committee, as I mentioned, the Planning Commission, and the City Council. So in terms of the meeting dates and when this outreach takes place, we're here tonight for the Planning Commission study session to present some information on the community engagement and the whole process. And then there will be a City Council meeting next Tuesday where we will similarly present information about the update process. There are two public workshops that are scheduled in March and April to engage community members that will involve live polling, advertising of multiple surveys to obtain input. We are in the process of identifying 4 stakeholder groups to have focus meetings, and those dates will be determined as we determine schedules. There will be at least 2 safety committee meetings in the safety element update process, and there will be 2 Planning Commission and 2 City Council meetings on both the draft and the final housing elements, which we're projecting to be in the summer for the draft and then late in 2022 for the final. We are in somewhat of a tight schedule as there was a recent law change last year that allowed HCD a 90-day review period on the first draft. It used to be 60 days. And there is a requirement that the draft be available for public inspection at least 30 days prior to the first submittal to HCD for their review. So that cut down the timeline by a couple of months, but we're still confident that we will meet the state established deadlines. And with that, thank you very much for your time, and I'm available to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you. Nice presentation. Any commissioner questions or comments for Andy and the team? Commissioner Pickett?
I have a couple. I don't know whose document we received, but it was on page 13. It had a timeline for the schedule, and it shows February a joint workshop with the planning commission and the city council. Is that not part of the plan now?
I think initially, and then I'll defer to Andy, but initially it was thought that we would do a joint planning commission city council meeting. However, that plan changed to do separate study sessions for each entity to allow two different opportunities to obtain information and to ask questions about the process.
Okay, so what we're doing tonight is basically filling in that blank for the planning commission.
That's correct.
And then what you do, you're gonna do next week with the city council, so that's basically that line item. And then, on that same table I'm looking at, under the housing element, it shows PC/CC accept draft. Are those independently done at different meetings, or are those joint meetings with the city council?
I think we're envisioning that they would be separate meetings. And the law requires it's the planning commission that technically transmits the draft to HCD. So the planning commission meeting is definitely required. It is very customary in cities to have both the planning commission and the city council receive and provide input on the housing element before it is sent to the state for review. It's sort of an extra going above and beyond what the minimum requirements are.
Okay, and you showed this in a little different format on your slideshow there. Are we still anticipating that the planning commission will see this in May and then again in October?
That is the plan for, at this point in time. We're about to embark on the public engagement process. And so I think that some of this will be dependent on how that process goes and what we're getting in terms of input, and having to schedule meetings with stakeholders as well that we haven't been able to determine yet, as we're going to have to coordinate schedules.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Commissioner Strawman?
Yes, do you have any plans to reach out to the city's youth commissions as possible stakeholders or participants, and they could actually motivate other students to participate?
Yes, in fact, we have monthly check-in meetings with city staff, and earlier this week that was exactly what was being discussed, is how to engage the youth commission to assist with the outreach, basically, because the thought is you want to engage not just all economic segments of the community, but really all segments and age ranges.
Thank you. And are you planning on recording the workshops and maybe putting them on YouTube, so that those of us who can't participate could actually watch it?
I would defer to city staff on that, but I do believe that we are going to be recording them.
Yeah, I would anticipate that we would be recording them, and they'll be archived in some form or fashion, perhaps more likely on our city's website, but possibly through the city's YouTube channel.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Anderson?
Hi, thank you for the presentation. I did have one concern about when you look at the actual opportunities for direct public input. The surveys are fine, and various social media feedback is good, but there's nothing like the direct feedback. And from what I see, there's a number of opportunities. There are two workshops, combined housing and safety. There's 4 focus groups for housing, and there's 2 safety committee meetings. Those seem to be the primary conduits for direct participation. My concern is that the 2 joint workshops are very heavily focused on housing. The first one, it says, they'll look at the process, and then the rest of it will be about housing. The second one talks about presentation of survey results and a number of live polling on several housing topics. Then the last sentence says, it will also include a presentation opportunity for public input on safety element. My impression is that those will be pretty heavily focused on housing. The 4 focus groups, obviously, they're intended to be specifically about housing. The 2 safety committee meetings, the first one actually appears to be much more presentation. It's information going out to the public. So there's really, in terms of, if we assume, and I would assume that the first 2 workshops are going to focus on housing, that's going to be the higher interest element. There's really just that one opportunity in the second safety meeting for real direct input about safety. And I'm just concerned whether there is enough opportunity to get that feedback on the safety side of things. I understand that housing is probably going to be considerably more interest in the community, but there's a lot of interest in various safety elements as well, or safety components of the safety element. And I wonder if you could just kind of address whether there may be other possibilities for separating out some things. I mean, one comment I saw there was that combining the housing and safety in the workshops was, for budgetary efficiency, and I'm sure that's true because meetings are expensive to put on. But I'm not sure they'd really be effective, at least on the safety side, for getting the kind of input that you'd like to see. So I'd like to kind of see what opportunities you might see beyond what's currently in the program.
Yeah, I can definitely address that. And we're preparing a housing element and a safety element in another city in California right now concurrently. And the safety element portion, because of the committee that is established, some of the parts of the safety element in terms of developing the actual goals and sort of the technical side of what goes into the safety element it tends to be a little bit more focused on professionals in those fields, like police and fire, for example, in terms of how you would improve evacuation routes, or do they need to be added? Climate adaptation, what are the technical issues that we need to identify in the safety element? The safety element tends to be a little bit more technical than the housing element. And because of the committee, I think that's why we've proposed what we proposed was definitely getting public input, but having the focus of the goals and the programs on how to provide solutions, mitigate risk, would be more in the arena of those professionals. That said, of course, the city has latitude to expand the public engagement opportunities for the safety element if that is, if that works for the community.
Thank you.
If I could just add real briefly too, I think we do agree with you in terms of the workshops having a little more emphasis on the safety element, and that's one of the things that Harris has been editing a little bit to give it a little more weight, and we're just waiting on final edits until we get your input and the city council's input. That's why we presented the engagement plan as a draft. We do think that we can do combined workshops efficiently and also with a lot of interest, but there will be a number of dedicated slides and, polling perhaps, or even, we haven't worked out the details yet real specifically on the workshops, but there will be, I think, substantial opportunity for input on the safety element. We're also talking about possibly splitting off the safety element survey from the housing element survey to keep it shorter and to draw the interest of those members of the public that are most interested in safety element issues.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Andy, do you need anything additional from us on this?
Well, first, actually, I would want to suggest that we open up for public comment. And we actually do have somebody who's raising their hand, if that's okay.
Great, now would be the time.
Great, I will go ahead and bring them in. Bringing in Jan Warren, and it'll take a second here. Okay. Where did she go? Okay, so Brian and Jan Warren, and if, Jan, if you could unmute yourself.
Hello, can you hear me? Hear me? You ready?
Yes.
Okay. All righty. I have comments on three or four different areas. One, I hope that the mentioned four stakeholder groups, the public will at some point hear who those four stakeholder groups are. I hear these things kind of thrown out. I was at the Contra Costa County housing element, and they just said, yeah, we've met with stakeholders. It doesn't help the public to reach out to those who maybe they think should also be adding information. In terms of the safety elements, I would just highlight, we seem to have the fire chief come out at least once a year to Walnut Creek to talk about the fact that we can't evacuate everybody, and we need to find ways to educate our public on how to be safe where we are at home. And I hope that will be included in the safety element. And I have a special interest here on the cost burden and the two different areas of cost burdens on both renters and owners. And I would be interested going forward in the policies and programs that we're going to develop as a city, because we obviously have a lot of people who, a lot more people than I realize, who are having trouble with high cost of housing, not just the new people coming in, but people who've been here a long time, and how we're going to address housing for all age and income levels, and helping people stay in their homes. Thank you.
Thank you for your input. Appreciate it. Mr. Secretary, is there anybody else wishing to speak?
No, there is not, actually. We have, no other public speakers.
Okay. Is there any additional information you need from the commission?
So yeah, we are just seeking, of course, input and advice, and definitely appreciate that what you've already given to us. Last week, was it last week? Yeah, I think it was last week. We went to the City Council Housing and Community Development Committee, the other HCD, our city HCD, and they were able to provide us with some suggestions as to areas that they thought we should focus on in terms of our outreach, community outreach. And so if the commission happens to have any particular areas or groups or anything that you wish to highlight or bring to our attention, we'd certainly welcome that. But otherwise, we're not looking for approval or a vote or anything tonight.
Great. Any last minute comments, Commissioner Anderson?
Yeah, just a couple. One was you indicate the housing element up to will include the following components. The seventh and last one is affirmatively furthering the fair housing analysis. And despite it being the last thing on the list, I think that's a pretty critical item. And I'm glad that it's not only there, but pretty well spelled out. And just wanted to affirm that affirmatively furthering analysis.
And I assure you that though it is listed last on the list, it is perhaps first in our minds, particularly because of the attention being given it by state HCD in their review of housing elements. Not only is it a new requirement, but it's one that I dare say is a very strict requirement. And not passing judgment one way or the other whether it should be or not, of course, just saying that it is. And so we are definitely keeping a very close eye on that.
The other comment I had was I have a long history with ABAG and their RENA processes and the wildly varying justifications for the processes that they use. And I noticed the equity adjustment mentioned. I think that's something new, and probably a good thing if there's some kind of transparency about how they do it. But I was surprised and actually pleased that apparently Walnut Creek has above average racial and economic diversity. compared to the rest of the Bay Area. That's a little surprising, but I think it reflects well on the last few decades of planning in the city. So to the extent you take credit for that, I'll pass that along.
Thank you. Yeah, we basically were kind of in, that was is going back to really the RENA methodology. And I forget if I made that presentation to this commissioner, if it was just to the city council, going into the depths and details of that black box that ABAG has created for divvying up all the numbers across the region. The equity adjustment kind of caught me by surprise in that our numbers went very slightly down because of it. You know, as you note, yeah, we're kind of basically middle of the road, I guess. In terms of you know, the demographic factors that they were taking into consideration when compared to the Bay Area as a whole, it's you know, you're saying as long as things are transparent, you're for it, and I would say that they were transparent, but boy, is it complex.
Okay, thank you very much, everybody.
One couple.
Commissioner Pickett.
Just real quickies, sorry. I'd just like to parrot what Mr. Warren mentioned about affected stakeholders, and there's references to community groups and directly affected stakeholders. And I think it's really important that those community groups or who the stakeholders are be identified. It's so vague. I mean, and one of the things that was really clear is that you know, a broad inclusion of the community, and it mentioned some specific groups, but you know, what groups or agencies are representing these titled groups. So I think just really important to be clear, this, you know, property owners group or this charitable organization or whatever it is. So we have names associated with where the input came from. I think it's important. Thanks.
Certainly, yeah, we would definitely be keeping record of that. This draft plan, we didn't want to identify any specific, you know, non-city groups yet before we've actually reached out to them and they've agreed to participate. But we certainly would be tracking that and you know, making that knowledge public.
Great, thanks.
All right. Seeing no other comments on this, we have no other considerations, so we will go to any commission member announcements this evening. And I don't see any staff announcements?
Yeah, I have one. You may remember over the course of the last 6 years, Ozzy Arce coming before this commission on a number of issues. Perhaps most notably recently was the Rethinking Mobility Transportation Strategic Plan, and I have the happy, sad news that he has accepted a promotional opportunity with another very lucky jurisdiction here in the Bay Area. His last day actually was last Wednesday. And so just wanted to pass that information along. He served us here for 6 years, served the city and the community, I think did a fine job. And so just wanted to let the commission know. Otherwise, I have nothing else to report this week.
Thank you. Any other last-minute comments? Seeing none, we will adjourn the meeting. Thank you.